Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest TPB TV, episode 4. And we have a very special guest here with us today, PFF Brad. How's everyone doing today?
Oh, it's awesome, man. Awesome, man. It's always a great day when we can have Brad Spielberger on, man. A great friend of the podcast. How you feeling today, guys?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I believe this is my first time actually getting to, sit down and meet with you. So,
Mm-hmm.
I've read your work before, so it's a pleasure, to actually, have you on.
Appreciate that, guys. Yeah, happy to be here.
So why don't we get down to the nitty gritty, man? I mean, of course, it wouldn't be right for us to have our guest on without us checking in on him first. The first question we have for you, man, is a new show. PFF at night. How's it going, man? That's probably one of my favorite tune-in twos over the recent since it dropped, man. How's it feeling having the opportunity to work with Ari and some of the other guys? Seth, I see you guys had Trevor Sycamore on the other day.
Yeah, it's been awesome, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been super cool, and definitely got some plans going forward to keep going with it. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Definitely, man. Definitely. I mean, of course, since we're here talking about salary cap, of course, that's Brad and his main thing. It would be almost robust of us not to ask what is going on with Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? It really is a super unique situation. It's I can't really compare it to anything else I've ever seen. Obviously, him being his own agent at the outset that makes it unique. But it sounds like he wants a top of market deal. He believes he's worth it, and he's cool with playing out on franchise tags or playing on the 5th year option until Baltimore gives him that deal. So we'll see where it ends up. I do think they'll probably find a way to get something done, but it's the question of the offseason is what's going on there.
Yeah. So, for you, what do you think when this ultimately gets done? What do you think a contract for him is going to look like?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be, if I had to guess, maybe shorter than some of Mahomes got 10 years, Allen got 6 years. Like, I'm guessing he might want to go shorter and try to get maybe a third deal, so maybe a 4-year extension. And I think it'll easily surpass 40 million per year. Probably the bigger question is, does it come in above 45 million per year, just below 45 million per year? Allen, who's in his draft class, got 43 million per year on a 6-year deal. So, I think it'll be in that range. And in terms of guarantees, the Ravens have been really, guaranteeing deals strongly and be willing to give a lot of strong upfront cash flow to their players. So it'll be a strong deal. It'll be a great deal for him. Obviously it'll be 9 figures and he deserves every penny of it.
Definitely. Definitely. So, I mean, obviously, with the Ravens and Lamar, there are questions, but there have been some people who've made some moves and, are solidified in them. Who do you think are some offseason winners and losers, just based on what you saw in the draft and, how they're looking salary cap wise, going into the future as well?
Yeah, I think these are maybe some obvious answers, but I think the Chargers and Bengals, they had Herbert and Burrow going into their 3rd year, the rookie deal, and we've seen a lot of teams in the past kind of spend a lot of money when that's happening because they're kind of trying to load up on talent before those big quarterback contracts are due. And so, the Bengals, the offensive line was the obvious big weakness of that team, and they got 3 new starters for, decent deals. And the Chargers, I mean, you add Khalil Mack, J.C. Jackson, Sebastian Joseph Day, turn around this entire defense, which was kind of the weakness for them last year, and just kind of keep everyone that you wanted to, extend Mike Williams, keep everyone in the building. I think both of those teams should be, right back in the mix of things this year.
Yeah. And so, for me, one of the teams that I really liked what they were able to do this offseason was the Jets. They brought in Jordan Whitehead, Laken Thomas, DJ Reed. What did you think about their offseason?
100%. All 3 of those signings I thought were good deals. I liked adding 2 tight ends. They basically had 0 tight ends on the roster last year. And so bringing in CJ Uzama and Tyler Conklin. And then they obviously had the 3 first-round picks on top of all that too. So definitely a good offseason. It's a tough AFC and a tough AFC East, but they do have the talent. It obviously just comes down to, if Zach Wilson's the guy or not. But there's a lot of talent on that roster.
So since we're here discussing about winners and losers of the off season, I mean, of course, we shared our fair share of winners. It's hard to get to a loser, but I know I can list my hands on my fair share of losers, which kind of leads us right into our next point of the wide receiver market, which could branch off into a bunch of different questions. But starting with the initial domino of Christian Kirk signing the massive deal. Exactly how did that change what's going on across the league wide right now, to give people a perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess every other receiver besides, should be thanking Christian Kirk because he totally changed the market. I mean, I've said this before, but I do the projections on our site going into free agency, and I had 14 million per year for him, and I had an agent reach out and be like, "Hey, you're too high on Christian Kirk. He's gonna get like 11 or 12 million per year." And I remember kind of texting him when the deal came through and being like, both of us were way too low. It was a crazy contract, and I think every deal after that. Look, the guy has never had a 1,000-yard season. He's a good player for sure, but probably not an 18 million per year receiver. Every deal after that, it was a different conversation. Players were able to say, "Look, we were talking about this amount of money, and now after this year, we're talking about this amount plus 10%." It changed the whole game, and now we've had, I want to say, 8 dudes signed for more than 20 million per year in one off season, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so one of the questions I had in terms of the wide receiver market was about sort of kind of leverage and resource allocation. Like with Washington, they have Terry McLaurin, but they drafted Jahan Dotson in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
So how much does that sort of kind of play a role, like in terms of leverage in the negotiation process?
It totally does. And we talked to the Bengals real quick, and their first-round pick in Dax Hill out of Michigan has been playing in Jesse Bates' spot the entire offseason, in practice. So it is absolutely something that teams think about. I do think with Terry McLaurin in Washington, look, they love Jahan Dotson. I think he's a great player out of Penn State, but that was 100% part of the calculation. They traded down before taking him too, so they weren't pressed to get it done. But now you can kind of say, yeah, look, Terry, we love you. You're a great player in the locker room, not only on the field, but everything you do. But we have this young stud that we just took, the 16th overall pick. It's definitely a factor, and I think they are using it and kind of weaponizing it against McLaurin in those negotiations.
Certainly. I mean, just speaking on it from the aspect of someone who's from the area of the team, a lot of the Twitter posts, a lot of the marketing has been geared towards Jahan Dotson. Like, hey, look at this new guy that we got. And I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm on record. You can find me somewhere saying this move was, when they drafted Jahan Dotson, was we gotta have to try to get ahead of the market thing. Because soon as I saw it, the first thing I thought was, I don't think they're gonna pay Terry McLaurin. They're trying to use this to say, hey, look, we got somebody that can replace you, so you should shine for a cheaper deal, or we'll see you later. And I mean, personally, my views on Terry, I think Terry should go get every dollar he's worth. I think Terry has earned every dollar he's worth from the moment he stepped foot up on our Ohio State campus up until this point. He literally, this is the same kid who didn't have a scholarship. Urban Meyer made him earn the scholarship to get him, and despite all the work he was showing. So everything he's done from that point up until his NFL career has shown it's worth every dollar he's trying to get. So, I mean, I understand it's a business at the same aspect. You can tell that it's a business decision, a marketing decision.
No, 100%. But like you said, I mean, the guy's had 8 quarterbacks he's got caught passes from now, none of them particularly good. And he still produces it year in and year out. And there's, scandals going on every, week. There's something new going on in Washington. And he apparently, and I think it's important too, he apparently is like the leader of this team and like a guy that every single person in the building respects. And that matters too. But yeah, I'm with you 100% on that one.
So, I mean.
Absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Parth.
Go ahead, Quell.
No, you're good.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, do you have anything else to say on this topic, or should we move on?
I guess we should get a little bit on the AJ Brown deal. I mean, we did make a move for a wide receiver that get paid $20 million plus. How exactly, did Philadelphia make this move? Because, I mean, from all of my knowledge is Tennessee didn't necessarily want to part ways with AJ. It just wasn't in the best decision financially to keep him around. Whereas a team like Philadelphia, who, I mean, a lot of us viewed in not in the best shape cap situation heading into the offseason after all of the extensions they gave out. How did they manage to come off with this deal?
So, part of it is, to be honest, I mean, the Titans owner versus Jeffrey Lurie are different owners that are willing to spend different amounts of cash. Like the salary cap does matter and is part of it, but also, you guys are lucky to be Eagles fans. You have an owner that is willing to spend a ton of money. But yeah, I mean, with A.J. Brown, I also think for them, they traded for Julio Jones. They kind of tried to push all in last year and make a run. They obviously, got the number 1 seed, but, give out a big money to Ryan Tannehill, extended a bunch of guys on defense. And just didn't kind of work out with A.J. Brown, where they were trying to, it sounds like, lowball him. And Philadelphia said, all right, look, if you're not going to pay him, we will. And look, 4 years, $100 million is a great contract for him, but there's still Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf. We talked about McLaurin. Like, the Eagles are smart, and they do this all the time in that you want to be first to the market, even looking like a Dallas Goedert, who's now making basically the same as David Njoku, and he's twice as good the player. That's just good business by Philadelphia, and they've been consistent in doing that.
Yeah, and then one of the things I wanted to touch on with the Eagles, just in terms of roster resource allocation, which I don't know if you can tell, this is my favorite thing to talk about. Team building. We saw them. They drafted Jalen Reagor. They've drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Devontae Smith. They've poured in resources at that position. Could you just talk about that a little bit, just in terms of like a roster building perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think when you see, obviously people thought they may have taken a third first-round receiver, and you could argue they kind of did with A.J. Brown. I think you obviously want to spread out how you're using your top contracts and your top draft picks and making sure you're addressing, different position groups. But that's also the benefit of having 3 first-round picks, and after the Saints trade, still having 2 first-round picks next year and a future second in 2 years now as well. So you don't always want to chase a position. But look, if Reagor was not working out, and it sounds like he's not, like, you also can't be afraid to take another shot. The example I said for the Eagles, the Lions, they actually used back-to-back top 10 picks on wide receivers. Neither guy really worked out. And the next season, Calvin Johnson, they had the number 2 overall pick. They still took Calvin Johnson, 3rd top 10 pick in a row on a wide receiver, and obviously they're happy with that decision. So,
definitely. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about, these teams that are kind of waiting to make a move on some of their star players, like the Bengals, like with Jesse Bates. Going into this offseason, following this offseason and, the investments that they've put around him, who kind of is gonna have the advantage when we're going into next offseason and going into the season? The Eagles or Jalen Hurts?
Honestly, I think it's not to not have a good answer. I think this season's huge. I think what their calculus is like, look, the offensive line was good, but maybe not great and as good as it's had been in past years. And the weapons were, solid. Again, you have Goddard, you have Devontae Smith, who's a good young rookie. But I think what teams have tried to do recently is basically say, honestly, it applies to Zach Wilson with the Jets as well, is like, let's make the surrounding situation so good that there is no excuse, right? Like, if Jalen Hurts balls out this year, the advantage is strongly in his favor, and he should get a big-time deal. If he doesn't, he can't really kind of point to, like, well, I'm lacking target or, weapons, or I'm lacking an offensive line. Like, they have solidified everything around him. So, I think it sounds like his reviews in camp, everyone's buzzing about him. Like, he's playing so well, and he's getting better every day. And I think we saw that over the course of last year. Obviously, people keep talking about the playoff game, which was not his best showing, obviously against a great Buccaneers defense. But, yeah, I think this season is kind of a, prove-it type year, for both of them.
Certainly. That kind of, I don't want to necessarily call it a segue, but a segue of sorts to kind of actually a piece I released today where basically everything you just said, Brad, is the truth. He has no more excuses. There are no more what ifs. I mean, yeah, you can talk about, but he's only played in X amount of games, and it's just over being 1 year starter. But when you talk about the business aspect of things, you're talking about a quarterback who's heading into his 3rd year in the league, a quarterback who wasn't selected in the 1st round, who doesn't give his team the luxury of a 5th-year option. So, I mean, if Jalen Hurts plays out of his mind this year, whether they believe that is the potential Jalen Hurts has or not, they're going to have to pay him like he played out of his mind, because if you don't, then the price tag does nothing to get higher. I mean, let's just assume when he plays out of his mind, like I said, and you have to give him another season at the helm, whether it's just playing out his deal or on a new contract. you probably missed out on your best opportunity to come away with a replacement, given that they have 2 first-round picks next offseason. This, like you said, this season is quite pivotal where it's hard to say necessarily who has the advantage in terms of whether it's Hurts or the Eagles. But by the end of the season, we're going to have a clear understanding of how this team wants to go about it.
No, 100%. And like that's the thing. It's kind of tricky. Is they are usually super proactive. They like to get deals done. I mean, Mailata and Josh Sweat. Like we could go down a list of 10 names, but the problem is they did that with Carson Wentz, and obviously that went how it went. So like they're probably kind of nervous and scared about, look, are we going to give this guy a top of market deal before we truly, truly know where he stands? Maybe they'll explore kind of some franchise tags with him. But the thing is, again, it sounds like they love Hurts as a person as much as a player. Like and then the locker room, is galvanized behind him and wants to win games for him. So I think it's going to be fascinating how it plays out, really. I think it's going to be one of the more interesting kind of storylines, the next couple of years.
Yeah, and so one of the questions I had, is there a situation where Jalen Hurts, he essentially looks about the same that he looked this past season with sort of kind of incremental improvements on his mechanics, where the Eagles, they could elect to give him another year and like preferably like kick the can down the road again in terms of a contract extension for another season?
I really do. I really do. And it's like, basically, I'm saying, like, if the Wentz situation didn't happen, like, maybe not. But because of that, I think we saw last year, like, with Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, too, where, like, he was coming off a good year, made the playoffs, won a playoff game, but hadn't shown enough, a full body of work and multiple good seasons of play. And it just kind of scared some teams away. And I think, I would say if he's the same where, a good passer, but not a great passer, obviously the legs are a weapon, but teams aren't really paying for that at the quarterback position necessarily. And then, also, look, you got to beat the team you're playing. But, if they go 1-7 against, teams with a winning record again and kind of beat up on a bad NFC East and beat up on some of the bad teams on their schedule, that's kind of a different conversation. If he balls out against teams like the Bucs and teams that have legit defenses, then maybe they'll do it. But, I think Philadelphia – I think they do love him, but I think they are going to be very patient and really cautious with how they approach it.
So, I mean, a bit of an add-on to his question and to what you just said. So, how likely is it that Howie Roseman and company tries to kind of do the same thing that they did in this year's draft where, like you said, we're stuck in that middle in-between ground with Hurts. You probably aren't in the ideal position where unless you trade both of these picks to get up to a quarterback where, again, you don't know what you want to do. So, like you said, kick the can down the road where if they give Hurts this extra chance, then they necessarily trade a draft pick or two. How plausible is that? Or do you think that based on how everything has gone so far, bless you,
Excuse me.
no problem, how everything has gone so far, they basically are forced to make 2 selections next year?
Yeah, so that's what I think is interesting is that I do think a small part of that entire decision was let's have 2 first-round picks next year in case he doesn't play that well, and we can use the extra first to trade up and then take a CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, one of those young studs that's coming up. I do think that's part of the equation. But then, like you said, if he's average and you're picking in the 15 range again, and the Saints, I think, will probably also kind of be average and picking in that same range, it maybe complicates things, to where it might be really pricey to go up. But they spent a king's ransom to trade up for Carson Wentz. They actually traded up twice, move up to 8 and then move up again to number 2 to get him. So I don't think they're afraid to do that. But I think all options are on the table. I think honestly, your question, worst case scenario is he's like above average, right? It's like either be a stud or like, kind of just show that you're probably one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL, probably could or should start somewhere else, but we're not going to give you like a top of market deal. I think worst case scenario is he's like good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things you touched on was like in terms of like his passing ability versus his running ability, doubling back to the Lamar thing, how much do you think that's going to have an impact on their negotiations? Like in terms of his or lack of a playoff success as a passer, how much impact do you think that'll have on that?
I think it does. I think it weighs in, really, because I think at the end of the day, when you're playing playoff teams and better defenses, there are going to be situations where you might get behind and like you need to be able to throw your way out of a bad situation, right? And it's like, I'm not even saying I don't think Hurts is capable of doing that. I don't think Lamar Jackson's not capable of doing it either. It's something that like I think teams need to see. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to pay a premium at that spot, like sometimes they're going to have to bail you out. We're like, like with Burrow against the Chiefs, you're down 3 scores. Like if he's a runner, like it's tough because I mean, like that doesn't you don't get back into games. You can definitely close games out and slam the door shut when you get the lead. But I think it does come down to like if we need you to put us on your back and deliver a bunch of just like big time throws, like can you do that against the best of the best? And I think that's a big part of the quarterback contracts in today's league.
So I guess this next question is more so of a 2-part question because I mean initially the question states between defensive end, wide receiver, left tackle. I mean it's hard to include quarterback. I mean I guess you could, but given the fact that you have Hurts on a rookie deal, but then based on everything we just discussed, you got to take all that into consideration as well. But based on all those positions, where do the Eagles rank, not just in terms of the NFC, but the entire NFL in terms of the team building rocket? Which leads me into, I guess it makes it a 2-part question of, I see you recently released a piece where Jordan Mailata was actually ranked as the #1 contract in the league. So just basically, how can the Eagles leverage the Jordan Mailata deal and some of the other deals they have in place to become one of the better teams, one of the contending teams in the NFL, and how far are they from that place?
Yeah, so I would say I really do think they're one of the better rosters, across the board on paper. We're pretty, spent a decent amount of money this offseason. I think one thing I think is cool about them that I like is they're kind of going with like a committee approach at pass rusher. Like, I don't think we've really seen that where like you keep Derek Barnett, you add Hassan Reddick, like you have Sweat, you have Brand coming back off injury. Like they have so many guys at a spot that I think we're used to teams like just paying top of market for one guy and they're just kind of having rotational players. So on the inside too, I mean, obviously Hargrave, Cox, and now you add Jordan Davis too. So, and then I think adding Bradbury at corner, obviously once he got cut by the Giants, adding Jaquiski Tart last year, I think is a solid, a safety opposite Anthony Harris. So long answer short, like I think it's a really, really good roster. And I think you've already seen the benefit, right? Like if Jordan Mailata was allowed to play out this season and play as well as he did, he's asking for $20+ million per year. And like, he deserves it. Right. And it's like, if Dallas Goedert played this season and played out the year of his deal, and then David Njoku signing for almost 14, Goddard's asking for 15+, like all those deals. Sweat again, didn't play like 550, 600 snaps, but was productive, is a good young pass rusher. Like when you get out ahead like that, it enables you to spend because they're already saving money on a lot of those deals.
Yeah. And one question I had in terms of the Eagles team building, Miles Sanders. He's heading into the final year of his rookie deal. What do you think happens with him?
He's super interesting, man. Like I feel like he's a talented player. I think you see it. He's a good receiver, obviously, which teams have been kind of more open to paying running backs that can also, line up in the slot, run routes, be, make guys miss in the open field as a receiver. The Eagles seem to be a team that does love the committee, though. Like they don't seem to be a team that wants to have a bell cow and just kind of ride one hand. Like they want to spread it out. But again, not to like avoid the question, I think this season's massive for him, right? Like I think staying healthy, but also just producing. It could go either way. He could get extended, or that they move on and just kind of keep trusting that they're going to add some guys in the draft. But they clearly liked him a lot in that draft to take him in the second round that year. So I think he has all the talent in the world. I think it just comes down to can he be consistent for a full 17 games this year, and that'll probably dictate where which direction they go.
Yeah. And so for you, in your opinion, just independent of any team, are you a pay a running back type of guy? What's your view on that?
He works for PFF, bro. Come
on. Yeah, I mean, in a short answer, no. But I'm not going to be like say you could never pay a guy, right? Like, for example, like Nick Chubb's contract is fine. Like, if you, as an analyst of football, even us nerds at PFF, like if you're going to rant and rave about Nick Chubb getting like not even top of market like guard money, like I think you've taken it too far. Like I think the issue was when you get guys getting McCaffrey and Zeke back in the day, like when they were getting like legit like wide receiver money, That's the issue. But I think the Eagles, the thing too is you spend that much on offensive line, and they probably spend more resources, both money and picks on offensive line, maybe than any team in the NFL. The point of that is because you think we can have such a good offensive line that, look, they're not replaceable, but you can throw a body behind them and they can probably get you 4 or 5 yards. So it's more of a question of like, can you balance all your other spending and then also at another position? I mean, you guys know they never spend at linebacker either. It's not just running back. Like they will never draft a first round linebacker. They will never spend big money at linebacker. So that's their philosophy. That's how they go about it. If you're going to spend a ton on the offensive and defensive line, you got to have savings somewhere. And I think that's the decisions they've made.
So, I mean, since you said that, that kind of leads into a much more interesting conversation that I'd like to get into, where I kind of have this thing where everybody has their thing. Everybody has their preference. Like you said, the Eagles choose not to spend heavily at linebacker, but will invest heavily into the trenches. You look at a guy like Pete Carroll over in Seattle, where they invest heavily in the safety position, invest heavily at the cornerback position, things of that nature. Where, like I said, different strokes for different folks. But I mean, do you have a preference? And in terms of salary cap wise, is there one that you think is a much more logical approach to positional, like which positions that teams value, not just based on positional value, but schematics as well?
Yeah, so I think at the outset it has to do with kind of like what you want to run. Like for forever we talked about the Ravens and the Patriots, like, well, two parts. So that's the first part. Just like, like if you're going to run a lot of man coverage, like you got to spend on corners that can cover in man, and those guys are going to cost you more money as they should. And then if the Patriots and the Ravens, like they just consistently let edge rushers walk, right? Like Zadarius Smith, Trey Flowers, like all these guys, they just did not. Chandler Jones, they traded away, like. And that was their decision, and that was based on what they did. So I think a big part of it is like pick your philosophy and then stick with it and spend around it. The second thing too, though, is I honestly think, like we talked about with receivers, like you got to also kind of look where the markets are going around the league. And if you can kind of zig when other people are like right now, I probably wouldn't pay receiver because the market's insane. Whereas like I like receivers. I think it's a valuable position. I think they deserve the money. But as of today, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to, go pay tight ends instead and then draft receivers and see if I can kind of save money that way. So it's kind of, it's also reacting to what's happening around you. But in my personal philosophy, generally, I'm a trenches guy. I think football is won and lost in the trenches. And that's probably not the most analytical opinion, but I just, when I watch film, if you win up front on both sides of the ball, I think you can kind of take over games and can sometimes kind of make those guys on the outside less valuable if you're just dominating up front.
So I guess that leads us to our Howie Roseman praises. I mean, you say you're a trenches guy. I'm a trenches guy. We've had a multitude of conversations here on the podcast about positional value. I wish you would have seen this draft night where it was just the whole thing about why did the Eagles not select Kyle Hamilton? And I'm like, I mean, I understand what you're saying because me personally, in terms of my whole scouting background, I had Kyle Hamilton ranked as the best player on my whole board in the whole draft. In the same breath I said that a numerous times during the process, safeties aren't very valued. Like safety isn't a position that you could just plug in and say, hey, go do this. You kind of have to scheme around your safety, put him in positions to be successful versus taking a guy like Jordan Davis. It's, hey, you sit right there and you make life easier on the guy next to you, the linebacker behind you, the cornerbacks on the outside, and the safety. So again, it gets into positional value. But Howie Roseman is known for being a trenches guy. I mean, last time we spoke, you gave us a nice detail where how not just, I mean, I'm sure that not just you have known before, but that's a lot of us been able to see over the course of this offseason and a lot of previous. But the Eagles have a front office that gets poached, for lack of a better term. Everybody wants a little bit of what's going on over there. And as you said, it's because the Eagles are among the first to do something where guys are making phone calls over like, hey, I didn't even know you could do that. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? So, I mean, clearly Howie Roseman is amongst the best in the league at his job. But a lot of Eagles fans take it for granted, I must say. And I mean, we're Philly fans. We love hard. Go Birds. We just want to win. At the same time, I try to explain, looking at it from a business standpoint, that Howie Roseman has been and will probably be for a long time among the best in the league. So, what is your perception of Howie Roseman?
It's the funniest thing ever. Like, see, Eagles fans roast the guy on Twitter. There's like memes. I see like it's so funny. And look, I would say this. I mean, look, there was a stretch of bad drafting, and I think most fans they think when they think of their GM, they think, did you make a good pick? And they see JJ Arcega-Whiteside and Jalen Reagor dropping passes, and they're like, all right, this guy stinks. And I guess traded up for Dillard. He hasn't really worked that either. So like I get all that, but the draft is kind of a crapshoot. It's kind of sometimes you have bad luck, sometimes you have good luck. You of course can invest a lot of time and energy and scouting and watching film and making good picks. But I think he just kind of had a rough stretch there of drafting. No, he's undoubtedly one of the better GMs in football. From a deal making standpoint, a negotiating standpoint, like the guy is involved in every single conversation. If a trade's going down, he's probably getting a call saying like, "Hey, do you want to jump in the mix here?" Because teams just know that Howie is always looking to make a deal. I think we did a ranking. Me and Ari, My Sports Update did a podcast. He was top 5 for us, and I think he deserves that because I think my thing at the end of the day is like, it's so hard to separate yourself in some ways as GM. Like, the players, either they're good or not, and their work ethic might not be related to, you at all. But he's always trying to find edges and do things differently. And like I said, zig when people are zagging and all that. Look, last year I thought they were going to stink and they made the playoffs. So, I think if you look at the full body of work, I think he's one of the better GMs in football.
Yeah, and you talked about it last year. Before last year, a lot of people had them as having, one of the worst records in football. Right before Doug Peterson was fired, I remember a lot of people, they were saying the Eagles, they didn't have a lot of blue chip talent on their roster. Over the last 2-3 years, they've been able to add a Darius Slade, they've been able to add a AJ Brown. How do you think they've been, or how he was able to sort of infuse the roster with talent?
No, it's a great point. Like, I remember talking to someone during camp last year, and actually I was like, hey, I heard Jordan Mailata, I heard, is the best player on the field. And the guy's response was, well, when the only good player on your roster is Fletcher Cox and he's 31 years old, like, I don't think it means much that Jordan Mailata is the best player. Like, that's what people thought. Like, they did not think it was a good team. I guess Slay was there at that point. Maybe we took him for granted. But, yeah, I mean, it's like the Slay trade, too, another good example. Yeah, they trade a third-round pick, and they gave him a big-time deal, but you do that with $16.5 million per year, and literally months later, we get Jalen Ramsey, Marlon Humphrey, Tre'Davious White. Like, in a matter of a month, Slay went from the highest-paid corner in the NFL to like the 6th highest-paid corner in the NFL, and I think it's because Howie's looking around and saying, all right, these guys need to get paid. We want and we need a number one corner, and let's go make this move now and get ahead of the market. So yeah, it's trades, it's signings, and then obviously, hitting on some draft picks. Also player development too. I mean, shout out their offensive line coach, Jeff Stoutland, is probably one of the better offensive line coaches in football. Jordan Mailata was a 233rd overall pick. Guy played rugby, and is now one of the best tackles in football. So they invest a lot in every aspect of their building. And it's, they're on an upswing right now. So now it's, it's all praise.
Certainly.
So, speaking of Howie,
Go ahead, Parth.
I think he's trying.
I think it's audio. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I guessed for a second. So we're speaking Howie's praises, and up until last week, everyone was, this is like the season from Howie, except we don't have a safety. And now we do. We signed Jaquiski Tartt. What are your thoughts on that signing and the value we got from it, and so late into the offseason?
Yeah, so I guess another thing there too, that like all the different aspects, they're also super patient, right? Like I think they knew we need a number 2 corner badly, we need a safety badly, and they just waited out. Bradbury getting cut by the Giants, and then Jaquiski Tartt, I think has kind of, because he kind of missed that interception in that game against the Rams, could have iced it. I think people take him for granted. He's a good player. I mean, he's a downhill guy that can make some big hits in the run game. and he's solid in coverage, not special in coverage, but a solid coverage player. Obviously needs to work on his hands a little bit, I guess. But no, I mean, it's a great deal. Like it's probably a cheap 1-year flyer. I'm not even sure if I've seen the details, but I'm sure it's a cheap 1-year flyer. And like, look, it's kind of like Kaiser White too. 1 year, $3 million deal. Like I think both guys are better than their contracts because the team was just patient. And I think for those two spots, there's a lot of available safeties and linebackers this year. So they were like, look, there's a lot of good players. We're not going to we're not going to get a Tyrann Mathieu, and everyone in Philadelphia wanted Tyrann Mathieu. And like, we're not going to get a Marcus Williams or name your player, but we're going to get a solid guy for a much cheaper deal. I think both of those additions were big time and for, very little money.
So talk about that a little bit more in terms of the deal of Kaiser White, because like you said, the Eagles don't spend money on the linebacker position, and fans have been, to say joyous, to say the least. It's just a limited term with the selection of Nakobe Dean, where it feels like the signing of Kaiser White flies a whole lot under the radar. So what exactly does Kaiser White bring to Philadelphia, and why was this a good signing for the Birds?
I think the big thing with him is coverage. He is a modern linebacker where, like, look, he maybe doesn't shed blocks particularly well. He's a little bit undersized, but he can cover running backs. He can cover tight ends. You can occasionally throw him in the slot to maybe cover a slot. And as awesome as Nakobe Dean is, I remember talking to someone asking about, why Quay Walker, besides injuries, I know other stuff has come out about Nakobe Dean now, but, why was Quay perceived in a higher light? And they said the team actually trusted Quay Walker to cover guys more than they trusted Dean. Like, Dean he's great sideline to sideline. He gets everyone in the right position, super cerebral player, but like, we don't love him as a coverage player. And I think what Kaiser White allows him to do is they just say, like, just key in on your responsibilities and just, show your speed sideline to sideline like you did at Georgia. And I think that's the big value of Kaiser is he'll be covering guys and is good at it.
Yeah, and so with the Nakobe Dean selection, like you touched on, the injuries, they played a part in it. But like me personally, I wasn't able to get that much like clarity on the situation. Could you dive into that just a little bit?
Yeah, so from what I saw, and I just, this isn't like inside information. From what I saw, it was he had a knee issue and a shoulder issue at the same time. So it sounds like the shoulder was the one that scared teams away more, and they thought he would need surgery right away. I think Howie Roseman himself was like, we don't think he does. Like, I mean, we know we saw the injury. Like, we're not dumb, but we don't believe he needs surgery before his rookie season. Or if he does, maybe he can get it and come back in time. So it was just a couple of nicks and bruises. No, maybe not nicks and bruises, but, a couple of injuries that kind of pushed him down the board. But that's, again, yet another example of, look, if Nakobe Dean's available in the late third round, like, why not? Like, I mean, we all watched that guy at Georgia. Why not make that pick at that point?
Of course. I mean, like you said, watching the kid at Georgia, where, I mean, that I like to make this point all the time, and a lot of the reasons why I decided to get into scouting myself was more so into, you watch some of these games, you watch some of these players, you see who are the heartbeats of these football teams, the most important players, and you say, man, I can't wait to see them on the next level. But then when you have the understanding that, yeah, it's bigger than just being a good football player. You have to be able to do this and execute like this and fit like this, and how size matters there. Just taking all that into account, you get to understand. Because, I mean, typically, I don't think many, if any, people understand outside of the whole injury thing how Nakobe Dean falls into the third round. Or necessarily, I remember even draft day itself where I seen the rumor that Quay is going to be a first-round pick, let alone probably be the first Georgia linebacker off the board. And I'm looking around like, I mean, I believe that he probably could get in the first round, but I don't think he should be or would be the first Georgia linebacker off the board. And long behold. So, I mean, just the whole process of how people and players are viewed across the league, and the perception of not just league-wide scouts, but some of us scouts from the outside looking in, how we can have a really good perception of a player in the league just does not view them the same way as some of the most entertaining things out here.
100%. And he's a little bit undersized, I guess, too, but no, 100%. And it's also, I think there's like, sometimes they get kind of too far. They want to project. And so it's like, it's all about traits and athleticism. And sometimes at the end of the day, it's like, is he a good football player? And I think sometimes that can kind of, we forget that matters a little bit.
Yeah. And so in the drafting process, scouting process, whatever you want to call it, there's a debate, traits versus, what the player puts on film or puts on tape. Which, like, in terms of like team building and like inside the NFL, how do you see that debate?
I think it's kind of the trend now is like in the early rounds, you probably should bet on traits because you're kind of trying to shoot the moon, right? Like you're using an early pick on an elite player, and you want to have the potential for that guy to turn into a legitimate superstar, a force multiplier on your player that can make other players around them better. I think what we've seen some smart teams do recently, and I think the Kobe Dean's a perfect example. But honestly, I think the Rams this is the thing no one talks about with the Rams is like, once the third or fourth round and of course the rest of the draft, it's some teams still are doing that, and they're drafting guys out of colleges you didn't even know existed that allegedly ran a 4.15 40-yard dash, in some fake field, whatever. They've just said, look, this guy's ceiling is not that high. He's never going to be a Pro Bowler, but this guy can play. He can start or maybe be a solid rotational player that has a higher floor. And that's what they've been hitting on in the 4th through 7th round a ton, is just guys that can play football. So I think it does kind of, the context matters of where's your roster at? And then also though, like what, are you trying to get an elite talent or a player that could become an elite talent, or do you just need a body that can just give you some solid snaps and, contribute in a small fashion?
And see, just that alone, I think that conversation is the perception of what's going on across the NFL nowadays. Even going back to, like you said, about the whole thing with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson in Washington, where sometimes you have these teams that bet on tapes and bet on traits around in the long run, and these decisions are being made with the roster in mind. I like to say often, you don't draft players for this year. You draft players for 3-4 years down the line, because 9 times out of 10, that's when contracts are going to be coming up. And like you just said a lot about the Rams, that is one of my favorite things about the Rams, with the ability to let a player walk. And we sit here like, well, how could they let this guy walk? I remember us saying a whole lot of that about them letting John Johnson walk last offseason, where how could you let this guy walk? And they're like, well, because we feel like this player right here, while he might not be a Pro Bowler, he may not even be the best in the league at his position. He could do what we asking him to do adequately and can replace what he's left, even if it's in a money ball sort of thing. Which kind of brings me to the Kansas City Chiefs, where it's impossible to replace Tyreek Hill. I mean, that's just the only way to put it. Having Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce was the advantage the Chiefs had over a whole lot of teams. And now you just have Travis Kelce. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still probably going to dominate in the middle of the field, probably a little more than he has in previous years, which is hard to say. But how do you think the algorithm can for what Tyreek Hill is being lost? You got the acquisition of Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, some of these other guys who they aren't necessarily Tyreek Hill, but equally they can
like you said, I mean, there's only one Tyreek Hill. You cannot replace him with one other player. The guy just does not exist. I think with them, it's like, look, if you're going to spend, $45 million a year on a quarterback, like you probably should be a little bit cheaper at the receiver spot. And Mahomes should be so good that he can make up for it and kind of, use, quantity over quality, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is 6'4" and runs a sub-4 440. The dude has speed for days. So he adds that, like, take the top off the defense element. And then Juju was a great deal, value-wise, super cheap one-year flyer for them. And then I love Sky Moore coming out. I remember watching his Western Michigan tape, and he's a great player. Maybe not right away, but I think he could be a really good player. So it's kind of like you said with Moneyball. Like it's a Moneyball thing, just like John Johnson, where they're thinking, look, we only may get 85% of Tyreek Hill's production, even with all three of those guys combined. But we're paying, a fraction of the cost. and then we can maybe fix this defense that's been an issue for us and kind of do some other things as well.
So before we get up out of here, I got one last question for you. Just ranking the Eagles' offseason moves in terms of most important to least important. Of course, you have the acquisition of James Bradbury, as we touched on, the signing of Hassan Reddick, the drafting of Jordan Davis, and then, of course, lastly, the trade for A.J. Brown. Based on how the Eagles roster is constructed, both salary cap wise and built like built to compete with the rest of the NFC and the NFL, how would you rank those moves?
I would put AJ Brown first. I mean, obviously, it's the biggest move, but I think the thing for him is that, like, I talk about this a lot, where it's like AJ Brown can untap Devontae Smith, like, who was a good rookie, but he was getting number one wide receiver attention, was facing top corners week in and week out. I mean, because he was the best receiver the team had. And so it's like now he'll be going against number twos. He might feast in his own right because AJ Brown's there. Plus, he can play off the line, whereas AJ Brown will probably play up on the line, face more press coverage, like just deal with things that Devontae Smith now will not deal with. So I think it opens up the entire offense for them, and I think is a massive, massive move. Number two, I would go Jordan Davis. I think, like as you mentioned earlier, like his job is to make everybody else's job easier. Like you can throw him in the middle to eat up space, and everyone around him, can have an easier job. Hassan Reddick, obviously a big deal. He'll have line up as a wide 9 and just get after the quarterback and worry about probably not even care about the run game at all because you have Jordan Davis on the field. Then I would go Bradbury. I think they really did need a number 2 corner. I like Zach coming out last year, McPherson. I'm trying to think, some of their young guys they have there. I'm sure they'll develop them up, but I think they needed a legit number 2. And now it's like you have Slay, Maddox, and Bradbury. That could be one of the better, cornerback trios in the league potentially if they're all on the same page. And then I guess I'm blanking on the last one, but whatever the last one was, that's the least important.
And Reddick.
Yeah. Okay. I touched on it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think their big thing that I think was smart and cool this year, besides AJ Brown, was more of a like let's put a bunch of players instead of just going out and getting one guy. Let's throw a ton of resources at it across the board, and I think like it could be good for injuries too. Like if they get hurt at some spots, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter. Of course it matters, but if they get hurt at some spots, they still have good players that can fill in, right behind them.
No, completely agree with you. I mean, while it becomes a crapshoot in terms of putting the Reddick move last or not, I think the Reddick move goes into a whole lot of what Howie Roseman said during the offseason of where you want to make moves to appease your defensive coordinator, but you don't want to necessarily stick yourself in a hole where once the defensive coordinator leaves, you stuck with a specific personnel. And wow, Reddick, he will preserve some production at edge. I think the move was more so made with the Sam linebacker position in line. So we'll see how that goes. But it's always a pleasure having you on, Brad. Always, man. Got to get you back on again soon. You got to see how all of the stuff that we played out. Always a pleasure having twice in one off season. Wherever Parth is at. Like, to give my man a shout out. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Like from your mom's phone, your friend's phone, your cousin's phone, your sister's phone, telephones, every phone you can find. 5-star subscriptions, man. Go Birds, baby. And we'll see you again.
Go Birds.